Fatal Frame 2 Crimson Butterfly is regarded as one of the best in the series, and it's almost as much of a survival horror staple as Silent Hill 2 and Resident Evil 2. And people really love this entry in particular, so it's no wonder why they have remade this a second time. Yes, you heard that right. The original was released back in 2004 for the PS2, and then was previously remade for the Wii in 2012. And now they have remade this yet again, but for all modern platforms, bar the Switch 1 and PS4. The story in this game is exactly the same as the original. It's 1-to-1, so if you've already played this before, you know exactly how this will play out. However, if you haven't played this before, like me, then here's a brief plot summary. Twin sisters Mio and Mayu find themselves trapped in the cursed Minakami village, where they encounter ghosts. Mio's only weapon? A Camera Obscura. A Camera Obscura that holds various types of tapes that can combat said ghosts. And depending on the type, it may yield some stronger or weaker results depending on how much damage is outputted into each one. But more damage isn't always necessarily the way to go. You must choose wisely because it may also have a longer recharge time than another with a lesser damage output. Also, to add to that, the game encourages switching between them often, as not only can some do more damage than others, and some have shorter durations than others, but also making them scarce resources. So with its limited use, apart from Type 7 that's infinite, you need to make snap judgment calls with which one is best to use at any given time. For a large significant portion of my playthrough, I found Type 14 to be my friend, but given my heavy reliance on it, it became scarce very quickly. More importantly, and I feel like this game doesn't really effectively explain this to you enough, not in this remake anyway, you should be upgrading your camera with the beads that you come across as often as you can. I didn't realize this until like about a third of the way in, that the single greatest upgrade in this game would be the focal upgrade. This essentially makes the lens bigger and able to capture the ghosts in frame more so, and makes life like 10 times easier. In addition to all of that, as you progress through the game, you can gain and pick up different filters to use at your disposal, all granting different effects and for different uses. The blue one, for example, allows you to follow Mayu's trail, the yellow one can warp the unseen. These can also be upgraded using the prayer beads that you collect, but I still heavily recommend dumping your beads into the focal first. It makes the game go from punishing to far more manageable. Also, you'll find that apparently there are far more encounters in this remake than the original game, which makes this feel like far more like an action game than a horror game, and honestly, it did impact my experience with it, because even with the right charms equipped to minimize those encounters, the game did feel like it was more of a chore than something to actually be enjoyed. It honestly took away from the atmosphere and the overall experience, because it was just too constant and not particularly enjoyable, and would detract from the central focus and pacing of the story. But with the upgrades and mastering the combat, it definitely did feel much less like a drag by the end. I think part of what increased these encounters, however, is the addition of side stories, which are pretty interesting and really do world build and flesh out the lore a whole lot more. However, increasing the encounters in each one of them oddly makes it feel like it's somewhat punishing for just wanting to learn more about the lore, and thus it became something that I actively avoided despite initially being interested. One of my favorite parts of this whole experience was really looking for those twin dolls to take photos of that unlock special rewards, but I felt like finding them was oddly a reward on its own.
It's like a reward.
I don't know, it's always kind of fun to me when there's like these small collectibles like that we've seen in like Resident Evil and now Pragmata. Also, one other important thing worth mentioning, the game awards you with certain XP to varying degrees, depending on how effective your shots are, so getting a fatal frame, as this series is aptly named, is extremely important. However, using the points exchange shop by the save points makes it feel terribly unbalanced. Sure, everything else you likely need, you can upgrade in other ways, but if you're planning on trying to upgrade things to the max, it's not going to be an easy time, because the item cost is far too high in this shop, and it became another thing I avoided and would only ever use to buy the occasional consumables if I found myself to be like really desperate, because I didn't really have much else to spend it on. And that's due to the fact that the other things that you can spend it on either can already be found in your environment, much like the consumables, or are for outfits, priced exceedingly high, to the point where it doesn't really even feel worth it. Like Silent Hill F, it's at these save points where you can equip outfits, and it's cool that you can not only mix and match, but also change outfits for both twins. But what's not cool is just how expensive these cosmetic items are. By the end of the game, playing at a more moderate pace and gaining XP at a moderate amount, you might be able to afford one of these items. But if you're really itching to get them, well, good luck farming. You'll likely still struggle even after getting all the endings, all the collectibles, and completing multiple playthroughs, though at least I can say that these points are accumulated across all save files. Now, finally, on to the one, I should say, potentially fatal flaw, arguably more so than anything else that I've talked about in this review so far, given the game itself is still manageable if you beeline the story like me and don't intend to explore everything. I tested this on several platforms: the PS5, the PS5 Pro, which is where I spent the majority of my playtime, Xbox Series S and X, and Nintendo Switch 2. And you'd be shocked to hear how they perform, because all consoles are locked at 30, regardless of which one you're playing on. And yeah, I had the same exact reaction. 30 frames in 2026 is honestly unacceptable, because 60 has been the standard for over a decade now, give or take. And it's one thing to have to lower a game below 60 as a compromise for some real intense visuals, but it's another thing when there's seemingly no excuse. The game does not have the best graphical fidelity, let's just get that straight. I mean, it's decent and there's nothing really wrong with it, but it's not exactly cutting edge for one. And then two, it's not like it's a fast-paced action game either. In fact, it's a very slow-moving horror game with graphics comparable to games from over 5 years ago. So don't quite understand why the 30 FPS cap is necessary. Of course, there definitely is a lot more that goes on when it comes to optimization, and I'm not saying that it's easy, but at the same time, if more time was needed to achieve that frame rate, then I think a lot of us would have been more than happy to wait. Rather you delay it and it be more polished than to rush something out. Now, I also understand that that's not on the devs necessarily, it's usually the publishers, but yeah, it also doesn't seem like they're planning on an update for it either, which is a damn shame. On PC, however, you do get the 60 FPS at least, but for some reason that's capped too. Strange. Now, I almost did consider purchasing this on Switch 2 to experience the game with gyro controls, and I'm so glad I didn't. And I'm super appreciative that they have a free demo available for all platforms for you to test out for yourself. Because the Switch 2 version is not only graphically worse, as expected, it's also locked to 1080p 30. Now, 1080p doesn't sound so bad if it were at least 60. If this were the case, then I'd 100% still buy the game on here over the PS5 Pro. But it's not. It is bizarrely stuck at 1080 30, and it's so weird that they didn't release this on Switch 1, because theoretically it should also run on there too. But I suppose if it struggles to go any higher on other platforms, I guess Switch 1 absolutely wouldn't be able to handle it. Which is bizarre, because it definitely feels like this was originally developed for the Switch 1. But what makes this even more of a head scratcher though is that this was developed by Team Ninja, who just released Ninja Gaiden 4, and from what I've seen, runs very smoothly. And then moreover, it was published by Koei Tecmo, who recently released the new Hyrule Warriors. And if you recall, that game runs incredibly smoothly on the Switch 2, with there being hundreds of enemies and all sorts of insane particle effects and such on screen. To be fair though, it is exclusive, so optimizing it for one platform is a hell of a lot easier, but at the same time, it's not the same kind of game at all. Now, how does it run on each platform, and which one do I recommend? Can't speak to PC exactly, but I'd imagine that's best given that you have a 60 FPS option, but out of what I've tested here, it's no surprise that the PS5 Pro would absolutely take the cake. However, it is surprising when pitting the others against each other. While the PS5, the PS5 Pro, and the Series X largely look the same, there's some minor details in the textures and the lighting that separates them. The PS5 Pro is better than the Series X, but the Series X seems ever so slightly better than the base PS5 version. But they're all very similar from my experience. But trying it on the Switch 2 and the Series S feels like an entirely different experience, just from the visuals alone. Insane. But what's even crazier is that the Series S looks even worse than Switch 2. They're almost as identical as the former 3 are to each other, but the textures look rougher, and the aliasing job is worse on the Series S in an attempt to upscale and bump the resolution. There's also quite a bit of pop-in on both consoles, but I'd highly recommend going for the Switch 2 version over the Series S, because it's very slightly better visually, has the benefit of being portable, and has gyro while in handheld. So if there's one thing I'd steer clear from, it's definitely the Series S. Let's just hope that they give us an update in the future, although I highly doubt it. Now, given that it's not a full price game, it makes it less of a difficult pill to swallow, and it's not like it's totally unplayable or anything. In fact, I was able to get over it after a while, and I enjoyed it for what it was. That being said, there are standards that have been set, and we should expect better from this. Sure, you might not really notice or care about this sort of thing, but it's important to call it out when it happens. As far as the glitches go, I would say that there's almost none, and that's expected given the trade-offs. However, there was this one part that I thought was actually kind of funny, where Mayu got stuck and would refuse to crouch to get through here. But luckily, she respawned right in front of me when I needed her. But aside from that, I experienced no other glitches. Also, before we go, I do want to quickly update. Apparently, in a new update for consoles, they had added in a toggle feature that allows you to turn off the film grain filter, which honestly really bothered me for so long. And then when I was experimenting for this video to turn it off and see how it worked, oh my god. It looks so much better, and it's almost baffling and bizarre why this wasn't just like a feature at launch to begin with, because yeah, the game looks a hell of a lot better with it off. I get it, it's for artistic style and choice, and I respect that, but at the same time, it did make things a lot harder to see, and I kind of wish that's how I experienced it. But alas, I was not so fortunate. Anyway, it's been about 2 months since release, so if you've played it, what did you think of it? If not, are you considering picking this up? Let me know down below, and until next time, I'll see you soon.